Hello and welcome to this tutorial on adding and customizing UI in Crayta. In this tutorial, we're going to look at how you add text and user interface elements into your game world, how to add HUD elements, and also how to kind of manage this relationship between what players are seeing what on their screen and what's displayed for everyone and what's displayed for individual users. So that last topic is something worth going into a little bit more depth. So Crayta is a game which is designed to be multiplayer from the ground up, including the creation of the games and all the way through to playing the games. So that means that you need to be thinking about what UI is present to what people. For example, a health bar is pretty useless if it's generic for everyone. You want your UI, your health bar to be specific to specific people. Whereas a prompt that comes up telling you that a door is just opened would probably be something that everyone needs to see. So you need to first think about who is going to be looking at this UI, which will impact how you script that UI to behave, whether it shows for everyone or whether it shows just for one or two people, or whether it's screen-based or whether it's in the world. So it's a little bit tricky to navigate all of these different aspects. But hopefully this tutorial will help you in guiding you through the different ways and wherefores of that. So this game that I've got here is basically it's a desert island which I'm hoping to tell a bit more of a story using the UI. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an intro screen. I'm going to click on the drop down up here and I'm going to edit the player template. And I'm going to add a script folder. Going to be called intro screen. And in my intro screen, I'm going to add a UI widget, intro, and I'm going to add script called intro script. So the widget is going to display the screen itself, and I've actually uploaded a graphic so that we can use a graphical intro screen, which is going to welcome the player to the screen. The intro script is going to be how we make that welcome screen disappear when you press a button. So thinking ahead, this particular piece of UI, this is going to display for any user when they enter the game, and it's going to disappear when they click any button. So this UI is going to be screen-based, and it's going to be visibility, and it's going to be local only. I'm going to keep visible checked, so this will be automatically appearing whenever anyone enters the game, and I can actually test that if I press preview and test. You can see that it's automatically appeared. It's not quite right, but that will now appear for every person that enters the game. So I'm just going to go back to that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to edit my HTML. So widgets are written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The first part is the CSS, which is how the widget is styled. Then comes the HTML, which is the content within the widget itself. Then comes the JavaScript, which is any dynamic scripting or functionality that needs to be added to the widget. There's plenty of tutorials online on how to edit and customize CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. And it's a really good skill to learn because it's very transferable to other games and also to websites and things like that. So it's definitely worth learning some HTML scripting. I'm just going to copy and paste the scripts that I've already written into this for brevity, but I will also make it so that there's a package available so that you can download and investigate all of the different scripts and UI widgets in that package after the tutorial. So my intro here. And I'm just going to paste that in here. One aspect of this intro is that I've used a graphic. So in order to use custom graphics, which is completely doable in Crayta, all you need to do is go over to the create.crayta.com, log in with your Stadia login, and then navigate to the My UI Images section. So here you can upload a new UI image, which will then be pending approval for a couple of hours, and then once it's approved, you can then use it in your game. So it's worth doing this ahead of time, ahead of when you want to actually use it, so that it's already approved when you're ready to go. Once you have it, you can literally, once it's been approved, you can literally click on the URL underneath it and then paste it into your widget. So there we go. So that's my widget. I've also done some CSS3 animations to show that you can use quite a lot of different powerful CSS stuff in order to make your UI feel really polished and juicy. So this should now appear for everyone when they enter the game. To get it to disappear, I want it to disappear when you press any button. So just going over to my intro script, the way we do that is I'm actually just going to copy it. Function here. And we do self get entity, which gets hold of the player, dot, and then the name of the widget. So my widget is called intro, which you can see here, dot intro. And then you can either hide or show that widget. So hide makes it disappear, show makes it appear. So local on button pressed this function is run whenever a user presses a button, and it's run on their client. So each user has their own client, and there's one central server. Things that run on the server are concerned with either everyone or the game itself. Things that run on the clients are concerned with that particular person's experience in the game at that moment. So I want this splash screen or this intro screen to appear for everyone, but I want them to decide when to close it. And that's going to happen when they press a button. You can also do on button pressed, which is a different function. It still runs when a user presses a button, but this will run on the server. So the UI in this situation, I've set the visibility to local only. So if this was to run on the server, it wouldn't know what the dot intro, the reference to the widget is, because that widget doesn't exist on the server. It only exists on the player, on the client. So by having this function use the local on button pressed function means that we're already on the client, which means that this intro does exist, which means we can hide it. Cool. So I pressed jump and the intro screen disappeared. So that's how we do a really, really simple intro script. Now, if you wanted to add some text within your game itself, that's also pretty straightforward. So let's say I've got this plane over here, and let's say I want to add a plane signature to it. The best way to do it is to first add a locator. So create child locator, which will be the position of the widget in the world space. Signature. I'm going to, with this locator selected, I'm going to do entity add UI widget, new UI widget, and this one's going to be plane signature. So when I add that, you'll notice that nothing has appeared, which is nothing to worry about because there's a reason for that. So this widget is currently set to type screen, which type screen means that it's superimposed on a player's screen. However, if I've added it into my game world, there's no real player for it to be corresponding to, which means it doesn't know what to do here. So we need to change that to be world. As soon as I change it to world, you can see that now my widget is embedded within the world itself. So if you want a widget to be superimposed on the player's screen, you need to make sure you've added it to the player or the user, their template specifically. Whereas if you want the widget to be in the world for like a sign, for example, or a house name or a street sign or something like that, then it needs to be added within the world, and it needs to be set to type world. Okay, so there's two different types of UI really here at play here. Just gonna rotate it and position it and edit the HTML so that it's what I want it to be. So here's my plain signature HTML. Sometimes it doesn't update straight away. So something you can do is enter and exit the game. I'm going to increase the size. So currently 100 by 100 is quite small. So 500 by 200. And then I'm just going to move it so that it's on my plane like that. So with this widget, I've used a couple of custom fonts, which you can see here. You can use custom fonts by navigating. If you just go to the Crayta tutorials, there's a using fonts in Crayta tutorial in here, where it lists all the different fonts you can use, as well as a little bit of source code on how to do that, which you can add to your widget. So that's my smoky frog. So this now tells a little bit of a story. So that's a really good way of using text within the game. I've got the name of my pilot, Arthur John, and the name of his plane, Smoky Frog. Another good way of telling a story in the game is by having content that appears when you interact with it or when you walk over a trigger. For example, over here, I've got this radio. And what I want to do is I want this radio to have a widget which appears when you enter the trigger, almost like you can only hear what the radio is saying when you move close enough. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a similar thing to what I've just done, where I'm going to add a locator to my radio. So entity, create child, script folder. Nope, that's the wrong thing to do. Entity, create child locator. This is going to be called radio message. And I'm going to add a widget, which is going to be called radio transmission. And this one, just going to edit the CSS, edit the code so that it's my radio transmission. And now if I set this to world, you should see that it appears if I move it. Ah, yes, quite updated. Yeah, so in and out. Good. Yep, there it is. Let's increase the size again, 500 by 200. And let's just rotate this so that it sits just above the radio. I'm going to snap this. Exactly. Radio, move it down. So this radio broadcast now is automatically there. If I go and navigate over to it, you can see it's above it. However, if I approach this radio from behind, I could still hear the radio. Doesn't matter whether I'm in front of it or behind it, but I can't read the text, which feels a little bit not quite right. So in order to combat that, rather than setting it to the world type, I'm going to set it to a world camera facing. So now it still appears above it, but it doesn't matter which direction I look at it from. It will always face the camera, and that includes above it and below it, which is a lot more, I don't know, it's a lot more user-friendly. So if you're having any kind of conversation with anyone or listening to something, you can now see that regardless of which angle you're coming at from. So this is a really good way of subtitling sounds in your game. Just going to move it down a little bit. In order to make it appear or disappear, which is also really useful. Let's start by setting this radio message to not visible. And we're going to need to add a script to this. So we're going to call this script radio mission script. Just edit that. And here's the script for this one. So there's two functions that I've added here. One is show transmission, which is going to call the show function of that widget. And one is hide transmission, which is going to call the hide function of that widget. But notice that I've wrapped this in a conditional. So here I'm checking whether it's the server or not. So when someone enters a trigger, there's a function that's called on the server. which says, oh, this player has entered this trigger. But when it comes to UI, I want that. I want the UI code to run on people's on the client machines. I don't want this UI to run on the server. So in order for that to happen, I have to call the same function, but I have to call it on the clients. And to do that, I literally just put in the function name and I say send to all clients. So I'm checking whether I'm on the server. If I am on the server, it runs this section of code here, and it literally goes, run this same function, but run it on the clients. So then it will go back to the start and it will say, am I on the server? And this time they're not on the server, they're on the client, which means that they can show the transmission. And if I just have a look in the game. Oh. By now, oh yeah, I haven't hooked up to that trigger. So I've got those two functions in that script. The last thing here to do is, if I just navigate to it, you'll see I've already added a trigger here, trigger 1, aptly named. So I'm just going to do that. Why? Ah, that's the wrong trigger. That's a different trigger. I need to just... This trigger here is trigger 2, which is attached to the method test. So here on trigger enter, I'm literally going to click the plus and I'm going to hook it up to that script that I've just written. So on the radio, and it's show transmission, and on trigger exit, again, radio, hide transmission. So when a user enters the box, then it will display for everyone. So everyone can then see what the radio transmission says. When they exit the box, it will hide it. So from a distance, they won't necessarily be able to see what that says. But I thought this might be a good way, because this could be a team game where everyone is involved. I thought this would be a good way of someone going, oh, I can hear what's on the radio. And rather than have them having to relay it, everyone can see what the radio is saying. So that's how to make a UI widget appear when you're walking over a trigger. Over here in this game world, you can see I've got a map. And I want it so that a player can look at that map and it shows them an in-depth map graphic. Now, again, I can show you that I've uploaded a map graphic already here. So this is going to be really, really similar to that kind of UI widget, except this one is going to appear when the player on interacts. So I'm just going to add. However, also this one, because it's a map, I want it to appear on the player's UI and it's going to be their own screen. So I need to add this to the player, and I'm just going to create a script folder called map screen. In there, I'm going to create a widget called map UI. Let's call it map UI, and script, which I'm going to call map script. So let me just, I'm just going to edit this UI here, paste in what I've got already. So let's have a quick look at what that looks like. So here's my treasure map. You can see the graphic, and I've also created a button here. So you can see if I go back to map UI, I've got this intro button. In the CSS, I've got this button that I've added to the HTML. And when a user clicks the button, it runs the close map function, which I've defined down here in the JavaScript. And the close map with a lowercase c calls any script which has got a close map function attached to it in the game. So if we look at the So something we're going to need to do in the map script is handle that showing and hiding aspect of it. So we've got a button, we've got our map graphic, which you can see here. And that displays, in order for a user to be able to click that button, I'm going to need to be able to use the cursor. So you're going to need to check the requires cursor button. If I make it automatically visible, if I just turn off this screen here, I didn't turn it off, but you could basically, you can see that my treasure map now appears. So we need to do two things. We need to make it not appear straight away, and we need to make it appear only when you interact with the map. So let's turn off the visible button. So now it's invisible, and this is going to be local only. So we only want this to appear on a player's screen if they've interacted with the map. We need to just implement the map script functionality. So this is literally just going to get hold of the widget when the local game initializes. So when the client's machine has said, yep, I'm up and running, when the player is created, that's when this function is run. And we've added a couple of functions, one that shows the map, one that hides the map. And this is so that we can easily reference it from in the game. Go back to the game. Over to our map, click on that, and when I click the on interact, so when I look at it and interact, I want to go entity, one more thing I need to do, I need to add a script which handles the interaction event on here. So on the map, I'm going to click Add Script, New Script, and this is going to be called Pickup Map Script, which is something that I'm going to then need to add here later on. So let's just put Pickup Map Script in. And all this is going to do is literally, when a player picks up the map, so when on interact runs, I want to get hold of that player, so passes the player, and I want to send the show map function to the player. You'll see what I mean in a second. So, so we go on interact. Now we're going to go to our map. And we're going to run this pickup function here. So you can see I've assigned that to that. This pickup function here is going to call show map on our player. So if I look at our player, the map script has our show map function. So it goes from, I go here. So it goes on interact, which calls pickup map, pickup script, which then sends to the player show map, an event, which then calls this show map function here, which then shows the widget on that player's screen. So it's a little bit around the houses, but what it means is that when you walk up to this and interact with it, it will show the map on your screen. So the map is already there, we're just showing it and hiding it. Yes, let's just test that out. Fingers crossed. Walks into a tree right away. So interacting with the map shows the map. Now, I have already hooked up that close button as well. So if I just show you where that is, that's in player, map screen. If I show you the map UI. So here, remember we call this close map function here. In our map screen, we've got the close map function there. So that's how that's referenced. We're literally saying, you know, on click, run the close map event. Close map is here. We call the lure event. The lure event is here. So again, it's kind of like a little bit of a flow from one part to the next part to the next part. But once you get the flow down, then it becomes really, really straightforward. Another thing I want to do with this map is I want to make it so that when you look at the map, it tells you that you can interact with it. Now, in order to do that, I need to use UI tips, which is something we need to add to our user. So in order for us to give instructions to our user that have the button presses in them, we need to assign it to our user template, which is what we're going to do here. So I'm on our user. I'm going to create a script folder. One's going to be called instruction prompt. And in here, we're going to do entity add UI widget, new UI widget. And this one is going to be called interact prompt. And we're going to add a script as well. And this is called interact prompt script. Yep, cool. So we've got our widget, which is the thing that's displayed, and we've got our script, which is the thing which manages how it, when it's displayed and when it's not displayed. So I'm just going to edit our HTML for this widget. Again, this is going to be screen-based. This isn't going to require a cursor, and this is going to be visibility local only. If I leave this to auto, that means that it will only display on our local screen anyway. Whereas setting it to local only will mean that there's no other way of displaying it. So I could just leave it as auto. Just going to change my HTML. So I've pre-written this already. So I'll show you what that looks like. There you go. So press jump icon to interact. Okay. We'll talk about these single braces in a minute. And I just need to update that script as well. This is a little bit more involved, this script. But basically what happens is when the user is created, it runs this local init. In this local init, we get hold of the interact prompt widget and we hide it. So regardless of whether it's visible or not, we set it to hidden at the start. I'm just going to turn it off just in case. We also have this interact string that this has added. So in order for us to use UI button presses that come up, that string needs to be set at runtime. It has to be. So we set it here. We go press interact icon to pick up the map. Okay. So what that does is the interact icon part of it will be replaced by whatever the interact button is that the user that is on the control scheme that the user has. So whether they've remapped their controls to something different, whether they're using a controller or keyboard and mouse or some other crazy controller, it will display what button they need to press in order to interact with the map. So we have to set that in our property bag. You can see that's related to this interact string here. We then use this script to tell the widget that. So here in our widget, we've got prompt data, which is in our JavaScript. So this is our model. It says create model for this widget. And in order to set this interact, we can do that in code, and we do it just here where it says self.widget, which we've got assigned here, .js, so referencing the JavaScript in the widget, .prompt data, which references this particular model, .prompt, which references, I've called it interact there, change that to interact, equals self.properties.interact string, which is that string there. Okay, so that sets that, Another thing, another aspect to look at here is we've got this local on tick. So local on tick is similar to local init. This happens whenever the user is updated, and the user is updated something like 60 times a second or however often the game engine says to update the user. And in local on ticked, we're saying, see whether there's something we're looking at that we can interact with. If there is, then check whether that thing also has some functionality added to its interact function. And if it does, show the widget which says press E to interact or whatever. So in this case, we probably should change that to interact. Okay. So now when I go in the game, once I've stopped flying, if I go over to the map and look at the map, you can see the prompt comes up at the bottom, which tells me that I can interact with that. So if I had other things that I could interact with, maybe I could play with this radio, it would also come up and say press E to interact on the radio. Notice it's quite a good idea to position any like UI tips like this in a way that's not going to impact other text on the screen. So here you can see this text is sort of mid height, head height, whereas this text down here, because it's slightly different, it's not related, it's not embedded in the game world, it's for the user, outside of the game world, it's broken the fourth wall. We have that in a different position so that they don't overlap. I then press E, it brings up the map, and I can close the map like that. So that's how to add different kinds of UI elements in that way. The last thing we're going to look at, we're going to add a health bar. So health bar is really, really easy. We literally just go into the community, we search for health, and we click install on the health. You will see that it comes down with a health widget and a health script. And what we need to do is navigate to our player, and we go entity, create child, script folder, and you'll see that there's a template script folder already in existence called player health, which came down with the health package. And that's it. So now we have a health bar in our game. If I wanted to display, you might have noticed there was a problem with that. Let's just show you again. So there's a problem here where in the top left corner, you can see the health bar is overlaid on top of our intro screen. We don't want that. So in order to change that, you can actually change the order with which they appear. So what's in front of what. So I'm going to set the intro screen to be order 2, which means it'll be in front of the health bar. Okay. There's more things you can do with your UI. For example, if you wanted to, you could add a counter to count up when you collected these gems. I've included that script in the package, and it's possible for you to play around with that as well. But I think that kind of concludes the UI widgets tutorial. I've shown you how to add text embedded in your world. I've showed you how to add conversational pieces and like text that subtitles sound positioned in your world. I've shown you how to interact with entities and display UI elements on top of that. And I've also shown you that how to create an intro screen. So hopefully these are just a few like simple ideas that you can use and embed in your games to really add that kind of polished feel and to add a little bit more story. You can reuse them, you can slightly change them, but I really strongly recommend that you investigate the UI in good depth, because it's a really good way of telling stories in your games and adding a little bit more depth for your players. Thanks very much for watching. I really look forward to seeing what you make with this tutorial. Let me know what you think, and if you hit any snags and anything like that, and I'm more than happy to help you out. Take care. See you in the game.